I never thought I'd hesitate at the sound of a knock on the door. Not until that afternoon. The sun had climbed to its peak, casting golden streaks through the thin curtains of our modest apartment. I had just finished hanging the laundry, wiping my forehead with the edge of my shirt when it happened. A single knock, calm, measured, almost too polite to carry weight. But it did. I opened the door, expecting a neighbor, maybe a delivery. Instead, I saw him, Adrian. He lived across the hall, always quiet, always alone. He was the kind of person you nodded at in the elevator, but never really knew. My husband, Michael, often said Adrian was a good man. Helpful, respectful, the kind of man you could trust to watch your plants when you traveled. And Michael did travel. Often. As a regional logistics manager, his job took him far, sometimes for days. I had grown used to it. Our routines were defined by arrivals and departures, by calls from hotel rooms and sleepy goodbyes at dawn. That day, Michael had been gone for 2 nights. He was due back the next evening. And so, I was alone, as I often was. Adrian's voice pulled me out of my thoughts. "Hi, Elise. I'm sorry to bother you," he said, glancing behind him. "There's a leak in my ceiling, and I think it might be coming from your side." I blinked. "Oh, sure, come in. Let's check." We walked to the bathroom, where a faint trickle of water escaped from beneath the sink. I hadn't noticed it before. "Do you have a wrench?" he asked gently. I nodded and fetched one from the kitchen drawer. He knelt down to tighten the pipe, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, his brow furrowed in concentration. I stood quietly by the door, not knowing what to say. And that's when I felt it. Not his touch, not his words, but his gaze. He looked up and said, "Be careful walking barefoot on wet tiles." There was something different in his eyes, a softness, a question, a stillness that lingered longer than necessary. I forced a smile. "I'll get him up." In the silence that followed, something had shifted. I didn't know what it was, but I felt it in the weight of the air, in the pulse quickening inside my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because anything happened, but because it hadn't. And still, something had. It wasn't attraction. It wasn't fear. It was something unnameable, like standing at the edge of a forest you've never dared to enter, both drawn and afraid. The next morning passed like any other. I swept the floor, watered the plants, and tried not to glance at the bathroom. But when the second knock came just before noon, my hands trembled slightly as I opened the door. Adrian stood there again. "This is yours," he said, holding out the wrench. I forgot to return it. I nodded, taking it without meeting his eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. His tone was not invasive, not accusatory. It was sincere. "Yes, I'm fine," I said, a bit too quickly. Silence. Then he smiled. "I just wanted to make sure I didn't make you uncomfortable yesterday." I should have said no. I should have laughed and brushed it off. But my voice failed me. I simply nodded. And in that moment, I realized something. Sometimes the most dangerous things are not what's said, but what remains unspoken. The pauses, the glances, the small tremors beneath the surface. Michael returned that afternoon. His familiar scent, the warmth of his embrace, the stories about his meetings and long flights, all of it grounded me. He was my husband, the man I had chosen, the man who had chosen me. And yet a shadow lingered, quiet, invisible. Days passed. I told myself I was fine, that everything was fine, until one morning I was hanging clothes on the balcony, and I felt it, that sensation of being watched. I turned. Adrian stood on his own balcony, coffee in hand. "Good morning, Elise," he said with a light smile. "Good morning." Our eyes met, and in that moment the world paused. He didn't say anything more. He just sipped his coffee and turned away. I stood there, breath held, heart unsettled. Why did a simple greeting feel so heavy? The days that followed blurred together. Michael buried himself in work. I buried myself in chores. And in the silence between Adrian and me, something took root. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it wasn't nothing. One night, Michael came home exhausted. After dinner, he fell asleep on the couch. I stayed up, restless. The air felt thick, the apartment too warm. I stepped out onto the balcony, hoping for a breeze. He was there again, this time holding a cigarette. I had never seen him smoke. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "No," I replied. "You neither." He gave a half smile. "Sometimes the night is louder than the day." I didn't know how to answer that, but I didn't go back inside. Instead, I whispered, "You've been different lately." He looked at me. "So have you." There it was, the truth, spoken in silence, carried in glances. My heart thundered in my chest. "Elise," Michael's voice called from inside. I jumped. "Yes, just getting some air." I turned, forcing calm into my voice. But my hands trembled slightly as I slid the door shut. Before I did, Adrian's eyes met mine one last time, and I knew a line had been crossed, not with hands, not with lips, but with truth, a truth we could no longer unsee. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. I tried to return to routine, to the safety of repetition. I folded clothes with extra care, scrubbed dishes with unnecessary force, watered the plants twice a day, anything to drown the voice in my head. But silence has a way of speaking louder than words. And Adrian, he didn't disappear. He was there, always at the corner of my vision. A nod in the hallway, a faint sound of music from his apartment, a glance through the kitchen window. Nothing more, nothing less, but it was enough. Enough to make me feel seen and unsettled. One afternoon, I was deep cleaning the bedroom. Michael had left early for a meeting. I opened the windows to let the breeze in and turned on some music, hoping the rhythm would keep my thoughts in check. Then the doorbell rang, and I knew, even before I opened it, it was him. Adrian stood there, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. But his eyes, those eyes held a storm. "Hi," he said gently. I brought this back. Your husband lent it to me last week. He held out a plastic container. I frowned, confused. I didn't even remember, I said. He didn't move. Neither did I then. As I reached to take it, his hand lightly brushed mine. I flinched, not from fear, but from recognition. The pause that followed felt infinite. The air between us stretched tight, ready to snap. I should go, I said quietly, but his hand moved to the doorframe, stopping it from closing. Elise, his voice was low, cautious. I didn't meet his eyes. What? I whispered. You're avoiding me. My breath caught. I'm not. Then look at me and say it. Slowly, too slowly, I lifted my gaze. And that was the mistake, because in his eyes, I saw everything I had been trying to deny. Not seduction, not manipulation, but longing, loneliness, the kind of ache that mirrors your own. We stood in silence, two people held together by something invisible but real. He didn't move. He didn't need to, because I did. That evening, the sun set earlier than usual. The golden light faded into a soft twilight, wrapping the building in a hush. I stood by the balcony door, hand trembling over the handle. I shouldn't go, I knew that. But knowing is not the same as choosing. And that night, I chose to forget what I knew. I knocked. Adrian opened the door slowly, as if he had been waiting. He didn't smile. He just stepped aside and let me in. The apartment was dimly lit, warm, quiet. A bottle of wine stood on the coffee table. Soft jazz played in the background. Something to drink? He asked. I nodded. We sat, talked. At first, it was simple music, books, favorite memories. But beneath every word was something else. A current pulling us closer. And then he reached out, just his hand, resting on mine. I didn't pull away. Instead, I looked at him, truly looked. Why are you doing this? I asked. He hesitated. Because I see you, and I think you see me too. And in that moment, I hated the truth. Because it was gentle. Because it wasn't a game. Because it meant everything. His fingers grazed my cheek, his thumb tracing a line I didn't know was there. Elise, he whispered, I could have left. I should have left. But I didn't. Because that night wasn't about betrayal. It was about hunger for something deeper, something missing. His lips met mine softly, not rushed, not urgent, as if asking a question, and I answered. Time melted. The noise of the world faded. There was only breath, touch, warmth. There was only the quiet understanding between two souls who never expected to find each other, but did. Somewhere in the distance, a door closed, but I was too far gone to hear it. The night wrapped itself around us like a secret. No words, no promises, just the sound of breathing in the dark, the soft rustle of fabric, the trembling hush between heartbeats. When he touched me, it wasn't hurried. It wasn't desperate. It was deliberate, like a question I had been afraid to ask myself. A question that had lived in silence for far too long. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with the quiet understanding that I was stepping across a threshold I couldn't return from. Adrian's hand slipped gently beneath the thin strap of my dress, his fingers brushing against my skin as though memorizing it. There was no rush, no pressure, just presence. Tender, still, real. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I wasn't Elise, the wife. Elise, the woman waiting for someone to come home. I was simply a woman being seen. The way he kissed me, soft at first, then deeper, felt like something ancient, something buried. He paused, looking at me, giving me space. I could have stopped it. I knew I still could, but I didn't, because I wanted to feel. I wanted to remember what it meant to be wanted. When he lifted me into his arms and carried me to the bedroom, I didn't resist. The door closed behind us with a softness that felt final. The world stayed outside. Inside, everything slowed. We didn't rush. We didn't speak. It was in the silence that we told the truth. Every touch was a confession. Every sigh, a secret finally spoken. When he entered me, it wasn't only physical, it was something deeper, something unspoken passing between us, like pain unraveling, like loneliness collapsing. And for that moment, I forgot everything. I forgot time, forgot guilt, forgot who I was supposed to be. I only knew the way his hands cradled my back, how my fingers gripped his shoulders, how our breaths found rhythm in one another. Pleasure rose in waves, slow, aching, unrelenting. It wasn't wild. It wasn't dramatic. It was something more dangerous. It was real. And just when the quiet between us turned into stillness, when we were wrapped in the afterglow of everything we had held back for too long, the knock came. Loud, sharp, unmistakable. My heart stopped. A voice followed. "Adrian, it's Michael. Have you seen Elise?" Everything froze. My breath caught. My body stiffened. Adrian looked at me, his jaw clenched, eyes wide, then dark with something he didn't say. Panic surged through me like a wave of cold water. Michael was behind the door. He was looking for me. I sat up, the sheets clutched to my chest, heart slamming in my ribcage like a scream trapped inside. Outside, my husband stood, waiting for an answer. Inside, I was naked in the arms of another man, and I had no idea what to do. Adrian didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence was already too loud. The weight of the moment pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. This wasn't just about infidelity. This was about a fracture, a quiet break that had started long before this night. And suddenly, I saw it all. The distance, the longing, the slow, invisible erosion of something once whole. And now, I was standing at the edge of the cliff I had chosen to walk toward. And Michael was calling from the bottom. I didn't move, not for a long time, long after the knock had faded, long after the silence returned. Adrian sat beside me, still and quiet, his hands resting on his knees. He didn't reach for me. He didn't speak. He knew I needed the space to fall apart quietly. I gathered my clothes slowly, each movement heavier than the last. My skin still held the memory of his touch, but now it stung not from regret, but from the truth that I couldn't outrun. When I stepped back into the hallway, the light was different, harsher, too real. The door to my apartment was closed, locked. Michael must have assumed I had gone out, maybe to buy groceries, maybe to clear my head. He didn't know. He didn't suspect. At least, not yet. I stood in front of our door for a long time, hand hovering over the knob. I couldn't breathe, couldn't knock, couldn't return to a life I had just betrayed. But eventually, I did. I stepped back in. The air was warm. The smell of the lavender candle I'd lit that morning still lingered. Everything was in place. Nothing had changed, except me. Michael wasn't home. A note on the table said he'd gone out for a walk to clear his mind, that he'd been worried when he didn't see me, that he hoped I was okay. And for the first time that day, I cried. Not out of guilt, but because I didn't know who I was anymore. That night, I lay beside him in bed, eyes open, listening to the rise and fall of his breathing. I wanted him to hold me. I wanted to disappear. But most of all, I wanted to believe I could still be the woman he thought I was. The next morning, life moved on. Or at least, it pretended to. Michael kissed my forehead before heading to work. I smiled. I packed his lunch. I said all the right things. And when the door closed behind him, I collapsed. The floor of the kitchen felt colder than usual, the silence louder. I tried to erase the memory. I cleaned. I organized drawers. I rearranged books. I deleted music. But the memory wasn't in objects. It was inside me. And Adrian, he didn't disappear either. But he didn't chase me. He waited. A quiet presence in the hallway. A flicker behind the curtains across the street. A nod at the mailbox. Nothing more. Nothing less. It was me who couldn't rest. Every time I passed the mirror, I saw someone I didn't recognize. Someone who had tasted something forbidden. Someone who had felt both alive and ashamed in the same breath. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I heard it again. A knock, soft, familiar. I opened the door slowly, afraid of what I'd find. It was Adrian. He stood there, holding nothing, asking for nothing. "Elise," he said quietly. My name in his voice still did something to me. "What do you want?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to see if you were okay." I looked at him, really looked. He wasn't the villain in this story. Neither was I. We were two people who got lost in something they didn't plan for. Something that felt like warmth after a long winter, but came too late and too wrong. "I'm not," I admitted. Adrian nodded. "I miss you," he said. "Not like that. I miss the quiet between us, the way it used to be before we crossed that line." And suddenly, I wished we hadn't, not because I regretted it, but because it had cost us something fragile, something rare. Trust, innocence. That space where connection didn't need to be physical to be real. We stood in silence again. This time, it wasn't heavy. It was soft, like the last light of day before dusk. "I can't come back," I whispered. "I know. I need to find my way back to myself first." He looked down, then up. "I hope you do." And just like that, he left. No final kiss. No dramatic goodbye. Just the sound of footsteps fading down the hall. And something in me exhaled for the first time in days. For days, I avoided mirrors. Not out of shame. Not anymore. But because I knew I had to look eventually. And when I did, I didn't want to see a woman pretending anymore. The guilt had softened, not disappeared, but transformed. It was no longer sharp and accusing. It had become something quieter, a reminder, a question. Who am I when no one is watching? Michael had noticed the change in me. How could he not? I was quieter, slower, thoughtful in ways that didn't quite match our routine. But he never pushed until one evening. He came home early. The sun was still painting amber strokes across the walls when I heard his key in the door. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. My hands were rinsing vegetables, but my mind was far, far away. He walked in and leaned on the doorway, watching me. "Elise," he said gently. I turned. "Hi, you're home early." He didn't smile. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." I froze. My first instinct was fear, then relief, because maybe it was time. He walked to the counter and stood across from me. His eyes were kind, but heavy. "Are you still here with me?" he asked. That was it. Not "where were you?" Not "what have you done?" Just that, "are you still here?" And I broke. Tears rose to my eyes, uninvited, undeniable. I nodded, then shook my head, then whispered, "I don't know." He didn't speak. He waited. And that patience, that quiet love, it undid me more than any accusation ever could. "I got lost," I said. "I felt alone. I felt unseen. And I let myself be found in the wrong place." The silence that followed was deeper than any I had known. He didn't ask for names. He didn't demand details. He just stood there, breathing through the weight of everything I hadn't said. And then, after a long moment, he spoke. "You've always been enough for me, Elise. I just didn't realize you stopped feeling that way." I covered my face with both hands, tears slipping between my fingers. "I don't expect forgiveness," I whispered. He walked around the counter, and for a moment I thought he'd leave. But instead, he pulled me into his arms. Not tight, not possessive, just enough. Enough to say, "I'm still here." We didn't talk about it that night, or the next. We didn't need to. Healing doesn't always come with answers. Sometimes it comes with space, with two people choosing not to run away. I stopped avoiding mirrors. I began journaling again. I took walks alone, not to escape, but to return to myself. Adrian was still there, but we never spoke again. We didn't need to. He became a quiet part of my story, a chapter I would not reread, but would not erase either. Some wounds don't close with bandages. They close with truth. And I had finally told mine. Time didn't erase what happened. It didn't sweep it away like some storm leaving behind a clean slate. It simply made space for it. And in that space, I began to breathe again. Not as the woman I was before, but as the woman I had become, flawed, honest, still learning. Michael and I never pretended. We didn't paint over the cracks with false smiles or empty reassurances. We let the silence speak when words were too fragile. We gave each other room to hurt, and more importantly, room to stay. It wasn't easy. Some mornings, I woke up and felt the ache of distance still lingering between us. But other mornings, I woke to his hand resting quietly in mine, not gripping, not holding on too tightly, just there, present, enough. We started walking together in the evenings, at first in silence, side by side, then with small conversations, what we saw, what we remembered, what we hoped for. We didn't talk about Adrian. We didn't have to. He had become what some people are meant to be, a mirror. Brief, reflective, necessary for a moment, and then gone. But what stayed was this, a deeper honesty, with myself, with Michael, with life. I began to understand that love isn't proven by perfection. It's proven by choice, by the decision to stay, to rebuild, to see someone not for who they were, but for who they are trying to become. One Sunday morning, I found Michael in the garden behind our apartment building, kneeling beside the tomato plants he had once ignored, hands in the soil, sweat on his brow. He looked up and smiled. Something in that smile told me he had found peace too. Not blind trust, but something gentler, acceptance. "Elise," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans, "did I ever tell you how much I love watching you think?" I laughed softly. "No." He tilted his head. "Well, I do." I walked over, knelt beside him, and placed my hand over his. "I still think about everything," I admitted. He nodded. "Me too. And I still choose this." Those words, simple, quiet, and more powerful than anything I had heard in months. Because we were choosing again, not out of habit, not out of fear, but out of love, real love. The kind that isn't about the wedding day photos, or the perfect mornings, or the romance novels, but the kind that survives the storm, the kind that forgives, the kind that begins again. That night, as I lay in bed, my head on his chest, his breath slow and steady beneath me, I closed my eyes. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lost. I felt found, not by someone else, but by myself, by the quiet courage to face what I had broken, and the even greater courage to stay and rebuild it. Because sometimes the real love story isn't about the first kiss.